Hallo and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu. He is Stefan Bienkowski. And hey, Stefan, it's the end of the week and it's almost the end of the season. Matchday 34 is on us. Um, Couple things, show notes that we have to discuss. But before we do that, how's it going, bud?
I'm doing well. It's the end of the week. Big smile on my face. We were just discussing our plans for this weekend and how you've got this kind of crazy weekend in plan of touring German football, which I'll let you get to in a moment. And then I just responded saying, "Well, I'm going to a beer garden tomorrow."
Your plan sounds better.
And I'll tell you how much I've been looking forward to going to the beer garden tomorrow. It's been a thing I've had planned with some friends for a couple of months now, and I'm so looking forward to it that last night I had a nightmare that I missed it. That's how ridiculous it was. That's a ridiculous dream. I woke up and told my wife, and she just looked at me and said, "You're pathetic. Do you realise that?" But yeah, first time I've been able to have a freshly brewed pint since my son was born about 6 weeks ago. 7 weeks ago on Sunday, actually. So yeah. Well, actually, that's not true. I had a pint last week, but that was first time out with some friends,
Yeah,
actually. So yeah, I'm
it,
looking
it
forward to it.
It will be delicious and well deserved. I can sympathize with this, and it makes a lot of sense. No, yeah, my plan to tour Germany, going to Hoffenheim on Saturday, Thomas Müller's last game, but it's also a bit of a relic. There's still a chance that Hoffenheim could slip to 16th, if they lose to Bayern heavily and Heidenheim get the job done against Bremen, which is possible. But obviously also the whole thing with Thomas Müller, one last chance to see him play in the Bundesliga. I didn't want to pass that opportunity up. And I also have never been to Sinsheim, where Hoffenheim plays. So all good reasons to go there. And then
A pilgrimage for every true German football fan.
yeah, absolutely right. I need to see this. Sepp Staffelblöd said to me it's amazing, so I had to go and see it. So if it's not amazing, I blame Sepp. I always blame someone who's not on the show to defend themselves. Um, no, and then of course on Sunday, and this is the game I'm really looking forward to. I think it's going to be tremendous. It's going Köln against Kaiserslautern. There's so much on the line in that match, and we're going to preview that game actually on the show today. But Stefan, it's been a really busy week as well. We had so much stuff done on the Substack and also on the YouTube channel. Especially, the Florian Wirtz transfer saga. I think we did two shows on that, if I'm not mistaken, already. So I just wanted to point this out again. If you're looking for the Florian Wirtz news, there's not one but two podcasts on YouTube and on the Substack, right? You can choose your weapon, choose your fighter. You can get the Substack for $6 a month, and then get also all the articles that we have written this week. Stefan, you did a piece on, was it 5 players you picked? I think
Yeah,
five
alternative signings of the season.
alternative best signings of the season, right? A really great read, and the Matt always does his big fan scene roundup on Wednesday, and I wrote a article on 5 signings that Bayern Munich should make instead of Florian Wirtz, or if they lose out, or when they lose out on Florian Wirtz. So that's the kind of content you can get on our Substack, on top of the bonus shows, which at this time of the year are mostly transfer shows, right? Because Champions League is over and so on. So if you wanna check that out, I highly recommend you checking out the YouTube channel, which you can get for $2.99, the extra bonus shows. So lots of great stuff there, and I think that's everything I wanted to plug before we dive into it, Stefan. Unless I missed something.
I think that sounds about right.
That's great. Good. Then we can talk about football, which is also nice. Um, yeah, the big final, Champions League final. 2 matches that determine the fate of 3 teams. Freiburg against Frankfurt, they are third, well, fourth against third, respectively, play each other. And then Dortmund play at home against Holstein Kiel. The easiest scenario really is for Dortmund, Stefan. They win 2-0, they're in. They will finish in the top four no matter what happens in the other game, right? Because Freiburg and Frankfurt will take points from each other. And with a 2-0 win, they will jump either team, no matter what the result, one of the two teams, no matter what the result is in the Freiburg-Frankfurt match. For Frankfurt, a 1-1 draw or any draw will do. They're in. And then Freiburg will have to hope that Kiel gets the job done against Dortmund, which, unlikely, but you never know. Freiburg, they win. Frankfurt have to worry about the Dortmund result. That is pretty much the gist of it. It's a lot at stake, and I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what's going to happen in those two games. And let's start maybe with Dortmund against Kiel, because that might be the most obvious one, right? Dortmund again, 2-0, they're in. But we had a scenario like that 2 years ago, where Dortmund only needed to beat Mainz to win the Bundesliga title. It wasn't even a 2-0 win, it was just a win. And we all know how that ended. So, on paper, Dortmund against Kiel seems obvious that Dortmund will get their 2-0 win and get into the Champions League. But is it obvious, is the main question here, because it isn't like Kiel have been terrible. Although they're relegated, they haven't been terrible, especially lately.
Yeah, they've been quite good recently, actually. Unfortunately, that kind of fate was sealed last weekend with the defeat to Freiburg, who they did go ahead in that game, and Freiburg had to really fight hard to come back and win it. It felt like a game that was maybe going to be perfectly placed for Dortmund, really. And a weird kind of twist of fate, actually. Obviously, Freiburg winning doesn't help Dortmund in the immediate case of trying to win, get back into the top four, but Freiburg winning did kind of confirm Kiel's relegation, which means they had nothing to play for in this game. So it may have actually ended up helping Dortmund in a weird twist of fate. Yeah, I mean, Niko Kovac, I thought was quite interesting talking about, he doesn't feel like he has to make too many changes ahead of this game. I don't think there's too many big injuries for Dortmund. I was just checking, haven't actually checked, but in terms of, they're only Maximilian Bayer, Pascal Gross being suspended is a big one, and Schlotterbeck missing with his knee. I mean, Schlotterbeck's obviously missing for a while. Bayer's been missing for a while. Gross missing will be a big one, I think, to be fair, especially against a Kiel team who'll sit deep. Yeah, we need to see what it's like. I mean, Dortmund should win this game. Their home form's been very impressive for the most part. I know they recently lost to Augsburg not so long ago, but still relatively decent. They're typically quite strong at home, scoring goals for fun. The Bayer thing might be a tricky thing, because the last couple of games Jamie Gittins has played in that left wing and he hasn't really offered much at all, to be perfectly honest with you. So, against a team that will sit quite deep, Dortmund might have to kind of get a bit imaginative in front of goal. But Kovac has always just had so much firepower to pick from. That's the one thing this Dortmund team do have in spades. So much so, actually, that I'd expect someone like Adeyemi probably to play quite a big important role for Dortmund in this game, either as a starter or coming off the bench, which he's done tremendously well in the last kind of month, and kind of really causing havoc with that Kiel side. So it should be a game that goes pretty straightforward for Dortmund, but as you said, we've been here before on final match day for Dortmund, in admittedly far higher stakes than simply this, but it would be an interesting kind of wrinkle if Dortmund had this superb run to the last four, only to kind of trip up on the last hurdle. It would be quite Dortmund to do this, but yeah, surely not, Manu.
You say that. I thought that 2 years ago Dortmund would surely get the job done against Mainz, and then didn't. I don't know. On paper, Dortmund should win this game, and they should win it easily. But I think Leverkusen tripped up against Kiel this year, didn't they? So
Yeah.
it's not like Kiel where teams just went in and steamrolled them. And so, and there's this weird thing that you have when teams are relegated and they have nothing to play for anymore, other than just, it's the last game in the Bundesliga, and all the pressure is off, and all the pressure is on the other team because they need to win, right? And they don't only need to win by just one goal. They do need to win by two. And so I'm not sure this is as straightforward as people make it out to be. And we have seen Dortmund have issues when it really when there is high pressure involved, right? And so yeah, I wouldn't bet necessarily and say, okay, Kiel is going to get win this match, but what if it's only 2-1, right?
Hmm.
And Freiburg and Frankfurt play 1-1, and that's then I think if I'm not mistaken, that's not going to be enough. Um, so
Yeah. The interesting thing about that, and it's such a fascinating kind of aspect to all about the expectation and pressure. I thought it was quite interesting from Marcel Rapp. I think he said before the Freiburg game about, oh, what happens if you guys don't pull off this great escape? And what happens if you do end up getting relegated? And he was just kind of shrugging his shoulders. He said, look, this club, if we get relegated, nobody's going to panic. No one's going to be crying. No one's going to lose their job. It's kind of obviously something the club are used to. They're not used to being in the Bundesliga. So it is a kind of interesting wrinkle in all this. And I think Kiel have been playing with a degree of freedom that because they're no longer really tied to any expectations to stay in the league since the turn of their year, really. And you can see that in their form. Actually, they've picked up 4 wins and 5 draws in 18 league games since in the second half of the season, which doesn't sound like a lot. And sure enough, it still puts them second in the league behind St. Pauli and Hoffenheim, but that's 9 games where they've taken points off in our team. That's just so they basically half the games in 2025 they've taken something from those matches, and that is something that Dortmund should be wary of because, as you said, Dortmund really need to win this game by 2. In that time, Kiel have scored 30 goals in 18 games, so that's what, a goal and a half basically every match. So they do have a capacity to cause problems. And I think Dortmund really cannot let an ounce of complacency into their game in this match. And to be fair to Kovac, he's done a really good job of making sure they do pick up results. They have been very professional. They've been very direct. So you would think Dortmund should have enough to get over this one. But Kiel, as we've said, they've proved to be a real thorn in the side of a number of clubs in the second half of the season. So we'll just need to see what happens here. But it should be a fascinating match.
Well, I mean, like, I should clarify, if Dortmund only win, for example, 1-0 or 2-1, Freiburg and Frankfurt, a draw wouldn't be enough for them. That would actually kick Freiburg out. But let's say Freiburg beat Frankfurt only by 1 goal, then that wouldn't be enough. So, yeah, it's bring a calculator, I say, on the for that match day, because that gets us to the Freiburg against Frankfurt match. We mentioned it on the bonus show this week. Dino Topmüller has signed a new contract. President Hellmann, Frankfurt President Hellmann, making a big point out of the fact that no matter how the season ends, this will be a great season for Eintracht Frankfurt, especially, considering that they lost Omar Mamouche in the winter, their best player. So, no matter what, they will be in Europe, and they consider that a success. Having said that, Stefan, it is a lot of money, whether you play in the Champions League or in the Europa League. And Eintracht Frankfurt is actually one of the teams that are one of the better earners in the Europa League because of the amount of seats that they have in the stadium and the fact that they sell out every single game. But just to put this into perspective, a Champions League starter, right, will get 18.62 million euros. A Europa League starter will get 4.31 million euros. That's just for getting in, right? So if you win a match in the Champions League, that's 2.1 million euros versus 0.45 million euros in the Europa League. And there's more and more and more differences after that. So in other words, there's a huge difference between getting into the Champions League versus the Europa League. In fact, Eintracht Frankfurt earned about 21 million euros from the Europa League last year, right? Which is, again, is good. They would get almost all of that by just qualifying on Saturday for the Champions League. So just, put this in perspective. And this is what's at stake. And for Freiburg, they've never been in the Champions League. For a club like Freiburg, just getting 18 million euros, that is their transfer budget for the next 3 years sorted, right? And so, this is what's at stake here for these two teams that really are playing what feels like a final between them because again, Dortmund only need to win 2-0 and the result in this game really determines who the final starter is. Even though those two teams are kind of in the driver's seat, they're also in the situation to lose the most because of the results kind of work out here. Really interesting too, Dino Topmöller, he quoted Michael Jordan this week by saying, the fear of losing is what hamstrings players, and he really tried to accentuate what the things that can be gained by winning this match. And yeah, it just feels like a really big occasion for those two teams that have a historic chance of getting into the Champions League, Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, I thought there was an interesting kind of war of words, if you will. Top Mother also said the maximum pressure is on Freiburg to win this
Hmm.
match, which was quite interesting. And then, of course, Schuster came out and said, I don't really have to answer that question. It's ridiculous. He says no matter even if we lose, what we've done this season is still so impressive, and he's absolutely right. Of course, Freiburg don't have to win this game. It'd be great if they can and get to the Champions League, but no one's expected them to be the top four. So even if they do trip up here, it's still an impressive season. I think you can say the same about Frankfurt. We mentioned that on the bonus show when we talked about Dino Topmuller's news deal
Mm.
and what that means for the club going forward. But yeah, Champions League is huge amount of money for both these clubs. I was just thinking there when you were talking. There's so many players in this Freiburg team who could get kind of snapped up this summer. Rizzo Doan's the most obvious one who's been heavily linked with Dortmund recently. There's Merlin Rule, the young midfielder who could potentially move on, and then of course your favorite Noah Atabulo, the goalkeeper, potentially as
Mm.
well. So there's a lot of young players in that squad that Freiburg admittedly are a club that do sell when they have to sell, but if they were to get into the Champions League, they can maybe keep these guys. So it'll be an interesting one to see what happens there. I also, I mean, I know there's the kind of stipulation that Frankfurt only need a point, so maybe they can settle for a draw. But I think
Mm.
Freiburg go into this game. I think both clubs go into this game probably knowing that they have to take something from the match. There's just no two ways about that, really. And I'd be really interested to see what kind of happens because I suspect that I kind of feel like Freiburg maybe have the edge here. You know, there's something about Frankfurt over the kind of last kind of couple of weeks that hasn't been outstanding. They've only won 4 of the last 10 games. I suspect a lot of that's due to Mario Götze's absence. He'll be out for this game as
Mm.
well. I feel like he's a kind of linchpin in that midfield that kind of ties things together. It's not a huge amount of injuries for Freiburg, so they kind of have that advantage. And I think if you kind of look at Frankfurt's away
Yeah.
form as well, in particular, it's not been great. They've struggled to keep clean sheets, struggled to win games. They've only won one of the last 5 away games. It does kind of feel a wee bit like Frankfurt's season's kind of maybe stuttering to an end. Whereas with Freiburg, they've obviously got, I mentioned, that really impressive kind of result last week, where they come from behind to beat Kiel. They drew 2-2 with Leverkusen, which I wasn't expecting.
Mm.
And then they got 3 really important wins over Gladbach, Hoffenheim, and Wolfsburg before that. So, yeah, I'd maybe see the pressure's a wee bit more on Frankfurt to get this because I think more people would expect Frankfurt to get into the top 4. Bigger club than Freiburg, obviously, bigger expectations, bigger players as well, just profile in that sense. So, not to mention they've obviously been in the Champions League recently as well.
Mm.
But I do kind of think Freiburg might be better equipped to deal with this game, and based on recent form, based on personnel, based on individuals in the club. But we'll need to see because the other aspect of Freiburg as well, which we can't ever overlook, is the fact that there's just something about this club, the DNA of the club, that they do seem to kind of go within themselves in big games against bigger teams. I say this all the time in the show, but like
Mm.
Freiburg are the experts of winning against other mid-table clubs and clubs that are in the relegation zone. They're just excellent at getting the job done in that regard. And that Holstein Kiel game last weekend is a perfect example of that. But and then maybe this is a silly thing to say because they recently drew with Leverkusen, but they're not the kind of club that typically kick off big or pick up unexpected results against Bayern Munich, Leverkusen. They've got a dreadful record against Borussia Dortmund, for example. It seems as though as a club they've always been quite comfortable with the idea of the best 2 or 3 clubs in the league. They're quite happy just losing those games. Happy's not the right word, obviously, but they're just not the kind of team that kick up a lot of upsets. That doesn't really apply to Frankfurt if you look at their head-to-head. They have beaten Frankfurt in recent past, but I just kind of wonder if the kind of weight of expectation or the stage itself might kind of seep in and Freiburg might kind of revert back to that, which I hope they don't, because it'd be great to see them pick up a result here. But yeah, man, there's just so many kind of personnel, sporting, psychological aspects to this match.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with your comment on Mario Götze, who he went off injured against Tottenham, right? In a game that I actually think Frankfurt should have won. They didn't because they couldn't create goals. And Mario Götze isn't a goal scorer. He's even a top assist provider. 2 assists and 3 goals in 24 Bundesliga games this season. 2 goals and 1 assist in 8 Europa League games. But he ranks 96th percentile on Football Ref when it comes to progressive passes, right? Per 90 minutes with 5.2 progressive passes per 90 minutes. He always leads all top leagues, and this is across all top Big 5 leagues, UCL, UEL, and all of that over the last 365 days. I should clarify, but he's also always one of the players with the highest smart pass rates in European football across the top 5 rates. In fact, I think last season he even ranked first among all players in top 5 leagues. What that means is it's sort of the pass that leads that creates goal scoring opportunities, right? And what he really does, he does provide your team with the ability to unlock defensive lines, right? He's the player who plays the pass before the key pass, or sometimes even the pass before the key pass is played, and opens up space. And without him, they just have really struggled to create those chances and create those opportunities and create these moments where they could really overplay, especially teams that are very disciplined in the back. And when you look at the players that are probably going to come in and try to replace him for this match, you're looking like an Elias Giri or an Oscar Højlund and, maybe Hugo Larsson to an extent too. But those players are just not Mario Götze. They just don't have, he's like the chess master in that team. And it's such an underrated thing because it's so hard. When you look at just the naked stats, you don't see what he provides. But you look at the underlying numbers and Mario Götze still has world-class talent that is so very hard to find, especially these days, right? So I think that is actually a really, really big aspect going into this game. They need to find someone who can play that role, unless their goal is to just go for a 0-0 draw here and get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought in my newsletter actually on Tuesday it would have come out. One of the players I mentioned as being one of the signs of the season is Arthur Tiet, the defender, the Belgian defender that Frankfurt took on loan and then signed permanently in February from Stade Rennes. And one of the reasons I really like him is because as a central defender or a left back, he can play. He's obviously very good defensively, but he's also a really impressive player from a kind of attacking point of view as well. He's great at passing. He's great at through balls. He's great at getting the ball into the penalty box. He's a very kind of forward-thinking central defender. And the point I made was that in this Frankfurt team that really do struggle for playmakers, aside from maybe Mario Götze, he's proved to be quite invaluable in that regard, I think. He will be in the team for this weekend. I think he was out of the suspension, or maybe not. Actually, I don't know where I read that, but maybe it was the Europa League I was looking at. And the Pokal, sorry, I was looking at, he was suspended, which was a while ago, so I don't know why that's popped up. But he could be a big player in this game, as he has been for much of the season. He's kind of definitely been growing into a more and more kind of posted role for Frankfurt, either as a centre back or a left-sided centre back or left back entirely. So he'll be one to keep an eye on as well, especially going forward. But there's no doubt that this summer Frankfurt desperately need to kind of bring in far more kind of creativity in that midfield. And we'll find out on Saturday whether they've still got enough to go over the line or not.
No, absolutely. Should be a really interesting match to check out. And of course, a lot at stake. So is it this next game that we're going to do. We're going to go one league below, Stefan, to Köln against Kaiserslautern. This should be a Bundesliga fixture. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, it's a shame both these clubs can't come up.
Yeah. No, they can't. Unfortunately not. There was a situation where Kaiserslautern were really close. As things stand, so HSV are promoted. Yes, this happened. It is done. Nothing can stop this. HSV are coming back.
Start the clock. Start the clock again.
Start the clock. Start the clock. It is it's final. HSV will go up. All right. This is going to happen. It's the wait for them is finally over. A great piece by Sepp, by the way. Hey, on the Athletic, on the madness that happened when they went up finally. So I really wanted to give him another shout out here after I threw him under the bus earlier. So yeah.
Keeping him on his toes.
Yeah. But yes, that leaves the other former Bundesliga Dino. Yes, Köln were once a Bundesliga Dino, founding member of the league. Didn't get relegated until I think 97 for the first time. Playing against yet another Bundesliga Dino, not relegated until founding member of the league, not relegated until 1996. Kaiserslautern. And so Köln need a draw and then they're up. Right? They have to look over their shoulders because if they lose this match and Elversberg wins theirs, tiny little Elversberg from the Saarland will go up because they have a better goal differential. 3 points behind, but they have a better goal differential than Cologne. The situation is a bit more difficult for Kaiserslautern. They need to win this game and they have to hope that Paderborn in front of them lose theirs, Elversberg lose their match, and that Düsseldorf maybe only get a draw. So a little bit more complicated for them. When you talk to people in Kaiserslautern, they still believe because that's what Kaiserslautern is all about. But it is a bit more tricky for them. But they one of the players, Zimmer, came out this week and said, "We want to ensure Köln do not get to celebrate when we play them." So war words, tough words. They want to make sure that at least they have maybe still a tiny chance to celebrate themselves or get ready for the promotion playoffs. This is quite a matchup here, and wanted to shine some light on it. And as I said, it's really too bad that we can't have both these teams back because I think having Hamburg, Köln, and Kaiserslautern back in the league would be fabulous, but. Heck, if it's just Köln, I guess on this match day we'll take that too, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. Another match that will really a really hard one to predict, actually, to be honest with you. Obviously, Köln go into this game as favourites, but their home form isn't exactly exemplary. So far this season, they've actually only won half their home games, drawn 4, lost 4, won 8. They drew their most recent one against Regensburg 1-1. They lost recently to Hertha 1-0. They dropped 2 points to Dusseldorf. So, they're not exactly going into this game with remarkable form. They've only won 2 of their overall 5 games, actually, as well. So, they've got a lot to prove. And, of course, huge managerial upheaval, which Lewandowski wrote about in his Fight to Bundesliga newsletter. I think last week it came out. Which itself is an interesting kind of wrinkle in this match as well. Friedhelm Funkel, who was in charge, obviously, the club when they avoided relegation back in 2021, I think, was caretaker manager. But since then, Manu was actually the manager of Kaiserslautern, or head coach, I suppose, last year for about 15 games. And he's been brought in to try and fix things here, hasn't he? He's won his first game. But it's interesting to kind of see what happens here, and this just sums up FC Köln, I think, perfectly well. Like Louis in his piece basically explained, why the club opted to make the head coach change on the cusp of promotion. And he explained why Gerhard Struber, who was in charge since last June, or July rather, just didn't really inspire at all. The club were playing terrible football. They weren't doing tremendously well in the league. A change had to come, but to do it so at this stage, it's just kind of classic Köln, isn't it, Manu? It's just too many cooks spoiling the broth as usual. And if they do get promoted, it will be amid a chaos of madness.
Yeah.
And you expect nothing less from Köln, would you?
No, I would expect nothing less from Cologne, and I can't wait to be there no matter what happens, because it will be chaotic and it will be comical no matter what. I get to do it with Matt Ford too, which is going to be a great fun. We're going to be in the press box, and I will have to endure Matt talking at me for 90 minutes why Köln is the greatest city in the world.
Which means he's now a true Kölner.
Yeah, it's also delusional. But quick look at Kaiserslautern. You're saying, well, there's coaching madness at Köln. Kaiserslautern, in a much better situation than they are in now, fired Markus Anfang and replaced him with Thorsten Lieberknecht, only to actually further drop out of the promotion race. So this madness isn't just reserved for Köln. There's the other big traditional clubs in the Zweite Bundesliga are in the Zweite Bundesliga for a reason, which is decisions like this. And I love Kaiserslautern. I think it's a great club. I got to go for the first time last year, and it is one of the most amazing stadium atmospheres I've ever experienced. And I highly recommend anyone who has the chance to go, they should go. And this club belongs in the Bundesliga, right? But there is a reasons why these teams are down there. Right, it's the decision making that hurts them. And I also give you another one here, Stefan. When you just look at the last 5 matches going into this final match day, Zweite Bundesliga match day, of the teams that can still get promoted, right? Elversberg, Paderborn, Fortuna Düsseldorf, Köln, and Kaiserslautern. I listed them in this order for a reason. Over the last 5 games, Elversberg are first with 11 points. Paderborn is second with 10, Düsseldorf with 9, Köln with 8, and Kaiserslautern with 7. So, the 2 teams that are kind of playing this final are also the 2 teams with the worst record over the last 5 games, right? And so you look at someone like Elversberg, who going into this situation, and they say, well, maybe Kaiserslautern in their desperation will get the job done against Köln. We win our game against, let me just double check who they are actually playing against Schalke, and we're up. It's like that, and then you have this tiny village from Saarland playing in the Bundesliga.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it'll have to be what will probably be Heidenheim in the relegation playoff. One of them will have to play on, obviously. And that in itself is an interesting kind of addition to it all, because, I think Heidenheim are still a pretty formidable side. I know they haven't really shown a lot of it, but they've turned their own form around recently. 2 wins and a draw in the last 3 games. They obviously played Werder Bremen in the final match.
If it is Heidenheim, because Heidenheim win their game.
Yeah, of course.
And Hoffenheim gets smashed in Thomas Müller's testimonial, then it's Hoffenheim.
Yeah. I mean, from my own point of view, from just purely personal reasons, I'd love to see Düsseldorf or Cologne get up there. And, I mean, with all due respect to Heidenheim, they've been great in the league, but I'd love to see like Düsseldorf in the Zweite Bundesliga, or in the Bundesliga, or Kaiserslautern in the Bundesliga. I think that'd just be incredible, especially if they were to come up with Hamburg and Köln. The Bundesliga's attendance figures would like double overnight. I think if that all happened.
Well, you're not wrong. I mean, HSV is 57,000 seats. Köln is also 55,000 or 58,000 seats, and Kaiserslautern is 50,000 seats. So, and you take Bochum, Kiel, and Heidenheim out of the equation, where all have around 20,000 seats. Not double, but you're adding significant amount of attendance figures here.
Yeah, and you're replacing them with Kiel, Heidenheim and Bochum, who obviously don't have a huge amount. So it changes the dynamic of the Bundesliga a lot. And it's something that I mentioned on, I can't remember if it was on social media or the podcast actually, but I was saying, Hamburg coming up maybe sends a shiver up the spine of half that league because, like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
In fact, it was actually, I'll tell you what it was. I actually looked into the stats here because I was going to write my newsletter on it this week, but I opted to do something else entirely because I just didn't want to have to dig through 10 years of financial results in German. We forget that, and I don't want to turn this into a Haasfeld thing, but like we forget that Haasfeld, before they got relegated, were probably the second or third richest club in German football in terms of revenue. They're very, very high up there. And maybe Köln and Düsseldorf or Kaiserslautern aren't quite the same extent. They are certainly clubs that rival the likes of Hoffenheim, St. Pauli, Union Berlin, Augsburg, even Werder Bremen in that regard in terms of the size and stature. So it would completely change the dynamic of the bottom half of the table if those three clubs were to come up, along with Haasfeld alone anyway.
Well, you also look at like Köln, right? Köln have 140,000 members now. That makes them the fourth or fifth biggest team by members in Germany and one of the top 10 in the world. Based on membership. We joke about them all the time, right? Like they're badly run, and yes, one of the reasons is because they're a purely membership club and there's about 40 people that have a say in how the daily running is. But you also look at like HSV, they're a sleeping giant. And if they go up and they maybe do something similar than Stuttgart did and finally get their house in order, again, that puts pressure on teams like Augsburg, Mainz, etc., because all of a sudden you have one or two big teams that are up there with enormous financial potential if it's realized, and then that means someone else will have to go. And further down the road, you can say the same about Düsseldorf. You can say the same about Kaiserslautern. Yes, Kaiserslautern play in a tiny village of 50,000 people, but it's really the entire region that supports them, right? So then you add them, that puts a complete different dynamic on the league. God knows what happens if Schalke go up, who are in the top three together with Bayern and Dortmund in terms of membership. The entire dynamic of the Bundesliga just changes, right? And now it looks like we could get two back this year. A few years ago, we had Rafa Honigstein on the podcast, and he was talking about how the Bundesliga needs more blue chip clubs come back in order to financially compete with the likes of the Premier League. And he was mentioning clubs like HSV and Köln who were down there, right? And like now two of these blue chip clubs are returning. And I think that's going to create an interesting dynamic. Of course, Köln still have the ability to mess it up, so I'll have to wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the kind of joy of the Zweite Bundesliga. All these clubs are dropping points left, right, centre. Köln have an almost Dortmund level ability to trip up over their own feet. But as you said, it'll be a fascinating thing to watch. It gives us 2 excellent days of excitement. It gives me something to watch on Sunday when I'm nursing my hangover. That's for sure. So I'll be there in spirit, I'm sure. Smelling of spirits, no doubt. But I'm looking forward to having the goal alert on while I'm in the beer garden on Saturday, I must admit, and just kind of all my friends around me bemused as to what I'm going crazy about. An early goal from Kiel, I'm just throwing my beer in there and probably starting a fight in some beer garden in the middle of Glasgow. But
I sent you my
that'll be all worth it.
I sent you my DAZN passport, and then you can just VPN to Canada and watch it there on your phone.
Perfect. Well, I can watch it on an unnamed betting website in the UK, but I'll not mention how or why that's the case.
If the DFL listened, this conversation never happened. And on this note, let's wrap this up. We'll be back at some point, probably maybe Sunday. See, maybe Matt will be jumping on the show too, or maybe Matt and I will do a quick reaction from Köln. We'll see how it all plays out. But we'll be back pretty soon to recap this final match day in both divisions, because there's lots going on in both, and see how it all plays out. Stefan, this is great. This is our final Bundesliga matchday preview show. We of course still have the Pokal, see how we deal with it, but this is it for the Bundesliga season. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope people enjoyed this format that we had this year, because we're probably going to keep it next year. But yeah, until next time, auf Wiedersehen.